Okay, and we are live. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Thank you for being here for this webinar session, which is about eSIM for IoT. We are here today to talk about eSIM in the IoT market and the introduction of the new SGP32 specification, which is just now being certified in IoT devices and platforms and such like, and really about what it all means. And as per the title, we want to talk about how to navigate the next big shift and avoid deployment pitfalls. My name is James Blackman. I'm an editor with RCR Wireless. I am your chair for today's session, which is brought to you by RCR Wireless in association with Core, which is one of the very biggest IoT connectivity providers in the market, and which has just passed, I believe, 20 million IoT connections, and which has seen every change practically in the history of this exciting and complicated industry. Some housekeeping before we begin. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on demand later today. The slides and the presentations are available to registrants after the event. We will have time during the session to take questions. I'd encourage you to submit those at any time using the Q&A dialog box in the Zoom platform on your screen. We will come to those as we can. And just to note as well, the panel will switch on their cameras and go to video for the Q&A section in the second half. We will just run with audio and slides until that point. So the first thing to do is to introduce our panel. I'm joined by two fantastic speakers. So in order of appearance, I would like to introduce Stefan Sorrell, who is Chief of Research at Kaleido Intelligence. He has authored loads of reports about this market and knows it brilliantly well, and he'll be able to set us straight on where the market is up to and what the outlook is for eSIM for IoT. We also have with us Scott Lemon, who actually has I think is a new role at Core, a Senior Director for Market Engagement and Innovation. Scott describes himself as a futurist, investigating the bleeding edge, as it were. So he'll be able to also direct us on exactly where we're headed. But welcome both. Thanks for joining us. We'll hear from you each shortly. Just a look here at the order of service as well. Stefan and Scott will present in turn for 5 minutes each, give or take. And then we will roll into an open Q&A session. We have about 45 minutes. So we should have plenty of time for questions. Like I say, please ask those as we go, and we will get to them after the presentations. Something quickly about RCR Wireless as well. This is boilerplate stuff. I'm kind of obliged to do it. And also things are kind of changing at RCR, so we perhaps should rewrite the slide. But just to give you some background, RCR has been around since like before the dawn of time, practically since way back in 1981-82, and it's your go-to for news, interviews, insights, and all that good stuff. It now incorporates enterprise IoT insights and in-building tech. So we're covering digital change within the wireless sector itself and how digital change is being sold to the rest of the world. If that makes sense, the target audience is everyone in tech and telecoms and every enterprise vertical buying from tech and telecoms. Like I say, we're about to launch a new AI infrastructure venture, so watch out for that. Anyway, you can find us online variously, as you know. To say as well that we write lots of reports, and today's session will be followed with a long-form editorial report, which will summarize and extend the discussion in this webinar today. This slide, for the most part, shows reports I've been involved in, which tend to cover the enterprise space, IoT, private networks, AI, all that good edge stuff. Lots of parallel and overlapping areas, basically. I did have a slide about some of the findings in the new report, but I figured I'd let our panelists tell the story themselves. Suffice to say, this eSIM and SGP32 story is a big one, and we will get into those kind of drivers, kind of the value of the technology, all that stuff as we go. Very quickly, other things to look out for. We run lots of events, and we have a couple here to flag for your diary. NTN Forum on September the 9th and Open RAN Global Forum on September the 23rd. So both are post-summer, but we're getting in early. You can find out about both of them on the RCR website and just by searching online. But let's get to it. A reminder again to ask questions as we go. We have brilliant speakers, and this is your session, your chance to ask questions of them and find out. Here is the agenda again. We start with Stefan from Kaleido, who can give us the kind of widescreen view of this, if you like. So, Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, James. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, as James mentioned, I'll just give a brief overview of really how we see the market, why it's positioned the way it is, and perhaps where it's going. So in terms of Kaleido Intelligence, we're a specialist research house looking into cellular IoT connectivity, IoT roaming. So eSIM really is right up our street, and I think this is a really interesting stage of development for the market. But first of all, let's kind of look at the broader ecosystem. What is happening in the cellular IoT ecosystem right now? First thing to address really is the regulatory environment, and these sorts of things have been around for a while, but what you're seeing in general is more and more countries, first of all, restricting how IoT connections roam onto their networks. Roaming is the traditional mechanism of deploying internationally. Some authorities or some network providers, they don't like that, so they restrict it. On the other hand, you're also seeing, an increasing number of countries implementing data sovereignty regulations. So essentially restricting how data payload traffic can flow across borders. So, what does this mean really? It means that there's an increasing need on the part of connectivity providers to, if they want to support these, global deployments, to be able to localize or regionalize connections. And you can't really do that with a traditional roaming SIM very easily. So, this is where eSIM has come into play. On the other side, on the customer side of the market, we're seeing more and more sophistication among enterprises and OEMs. So on the one hand, there's more applications being deployed that require, better performance that roaming can offer. Roaming it's an interesting word. Home-rooted roaming is kind of a tromboning of data. It goes from the device back to the home network and back to the device. The latency is high. It's not great. And on the other hand, because of this maturation of the market, IoT is becoming more important to the companies that are deploying it. So you want risk management to make sure your deployment is viable in the field for a good 10 years or more. You can't really do that with a physical SIM. eSIM comes into play again because it's programmable. A third big shift that we're seeing in the market is, how monetization is addressed by service providers. There's a key reason behind that, and that's retail airtime connectivity and wholesale data connectivity pricing as well has experienced a long period of downward pressure. And that means for resellers and so on, margins are getting tighter. And this means that, service providers are looking at new strategies, providing infrastructure, for example, supporting eSIM or programmable SIM technology. And on the other hand, MNOs, who have traditionally had the large contracts, have realized that they can't actually go it alone in the context of quite a complex environment today. So we're seeing, on the one hand, MNOs becoming more open to working with specialist providers. These walled gardens are coming down. And on the other hand, you're seeing more specialist providers developing solutions to offer monetization opportunities, both in direct as well as indirect channels for partners. So some key shifts going on into the market. I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit more in the panel, but let's move to the next slide. So when we look at eSIM directly, this is a survey we conducted latter half of last year, 1,000 enterprises and OEMs, asking them about eSIM. Of course, back then, it was all M2M specification, SGPO2. So I think the results are quite telling. 37% of respondents among eSIM adopters saying that MNOs only support one profile specification. That means, overall in the M2M ecosystem, there was a low level of support. Other issues there are things to do with visibility control. When you switch network providers, you have to integrate with new CMPs, different contracts, different SLAs, and so on. That's a pain point that is certainly there today and possibly tomorrow as well. Third one, service providers lacking in areas or has issues with interoperability. And this is, perhaps a key point to talk about in terms of the M2M spec. Even when network switching was desired to optimize that connectivity, it was perhaps challenging to execute that switch in a reliable and expected manner. When you look at non-adopters of eSIM, I think, this really highlights perhaps a lack of education in the market. 30% not sure of the benefits of using eSIM, or 29% saying they're not sure, they think other solutions are more cost effective. And as we'll talk about later, I think there's still a lot of education to go in terms of understanding cellular connectivity on the whole, as well as eSIM. Let's move to my final slide. So in terms of the outlook, so I mentioned just now, SGPO2, the M2M spec was poorly supported. And when you look at the top row, SGPO2, over 300 deployments, what I'm talking about there is platform instances from, the Thales, the G&Ds, IDEMIAs of the world, and so on, Keegan. Whereas SGP22, which addresses the consumer, so the smartphone, tablet, and so on, specification for eSIM, over 1,000 deployments. So much better adoption. And really, this has meant, the cost, the low level of support, and so on, and the technical challenges behind M2M spec really meant that only automotive and utilities use cases were deployed for eSIM. When SGP32 comes into place, the IoT eSIM spec, you can reuse existing investments into consumer deployments. So those 1,000 instances can be reused for eSIM IoT, much greater choice on the market. And the way the underlying specification has been developed in terms of technical implementation and protocol support means it's much more open for all types of devices, much simpler to onboard. Today, we're at the certification stage of the market, testing for interoperability. So all the hardware, the OS, the platforms, and so on are currently in the process of being validated for the market. We'll likely see the first deployments at the end of this year. And I think, if you look to the right-hand side, we'll start to see some rapid growth for eSIM IoT spec by the end of 2028, coming up to about 200 million profiles issued for that specification. Yeah, I'll close it out with that and hand back over to you, James.
Thank you, Stefan. So lots of you've kind of answered a lot of my questions, but you've raised a bunch of other ones as well. So look, so that's great. Thank you, and it's very interesting to see those responses from the kind of user market, as it were, and what would appear to be a long list of challenges still. But for now, we are going to hand over to Scott, who's going to talk about Core's approach to this and how it's making all of it easier and flexible, presumably, and powerful for IoT customers. So Scott, great to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you, James, and glad to be here and get a chance to talk about this. It's an exciting time. I guess if we move to the first slide, I'll give a little bit of background on Core. Myself, I actually am a more recent addition to Core. I've been here for about 2 years, but Core has been in this business for over 20 now, and really has and was founded around a focus on IoT. That's really the beginning. We're definitely proud to say that, yeah, we broke through and are now in excess of 20 million managed connections on a variety of platforms, carriers across the globe. We've got about 3,600 plus global customers that are using our services and connectivity with over 500 employees around the globe. We do have our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, but we have offices also around the globe, along with a completely remote workforce that's quite diverse and spread around the planet. Currently, and from the beginning, one of the things that we did is started off with several direct carrier relationships for building out the business. And we now have a pretty extensive portfolio of carrier integrations, 45 carrier integrations, providing global network coverage and continuing to expand that. We continue to listen to the customers, figure out where we need to provide coverage, and offer that. We also do have the roaming SIMs and roaming relationships that Stefan was talking about that we offer in addition to those carrier products. We also are offering global managed services. So we do that in 23 different countries across 4 continents. And the global coverage that we're providing today is actually probably in potentially 190 plus countries. So we have people that are either deploying strictly in those countries. We have a number of customers who are, individual customers building products offshore, shipping all over the world with SIMs in them that can operate in any of their deployed locations. So definitely looking at IoT and what customers need and the use cases they have, and making sure we can offer reliable connectivity in all those locations. On the next slide, specific to eSIM, one of the things we're really excited about eSIM, eSIM definitely to me is so innovative in many ways. We're familiar with IoT devices, the need to have, firmware that can be upgraded over the air, just in your base device. I look at this the same way with eSIM. eSIM, eliminates that need for physical SIM swaps, truck rolls. That was really, that initial concept of eSIM, providing a reliable solder on, if necessary, SIM that gave you this ability to start to remotely manage the profiles and the connectivity that SIM was providing. Along with that, it's the scaling of that, being able to actually, manage the large number of devices wherever they go, dealing with the regional connectivity issues. All of that, eSIM is giving this ability to do it. And then certain enhanced security as eSIM has continued to evolve. Again, if it's a solder on SIM with a profile in it, that provides much better physical security. I'm still, we still have customers who call up that people are stealing SIMs out of their devices, moving them to other things. So that's not necessarily a eSIM feature, but once it's soldered on, how do you manage and maintain the profile and the connectivity and upgrade it over time? eSIM is what provides that facility. And just briefly on this last slide, I just wanted to touch on, our offerings and our background. I mean, we've been in eSIM since the very beginning. We support SGPO2, so the original eSIM standard. We still offer those SIMs and have customers who are still deploying them, although we see that, more on the decline in some ways as these new standards have arisen. The SGPO2 was, that first venture into, the eSIM technology. And for those not familiar, there were certain things about it that caused the future evolution. There was a little bit of a tie and a link to the carrier that you were getting it from. And then that sort of decreased some of the flexibility on the profiles you could get for it and deploy to it. SGP22 was a huge step forward. I mean, it broke some of those ties that were in place. It introduced the SMDP Plus server, the ability to now pull profiles from anywhere, basically, onto your SIM. And that became very powerful in consumer devices, of course, with that limitation that you were having to have something that called APIs in the LPA. scanning a QR code, running an application. There had to be something there. We do have customers who have actually built their own remote management protocol and console that talks to the LPA and can do that. But that's the exact problem right there. It's a lot of work to build those protocols, to build that platform, and it's proprietary. So SGP22 gave you this great, functionality and flexibility, but not the remote management. For headless devices, we are beyond excited about SGP32 and what it brings. At this point, it's sort of the best of both worlds. We're getting, the ability to offer the same flexibility that SGP22 had, pulling from a variety of sources for profiles, that flexibility, but now with a standardized interface for the EIM or the remote management of that SIM and of those profiles. And I think that's really what we're here to talk about. Core is offering the first two today, SGP02 and 22. We have our SGP32 products. They're in test right now, not announced at this time, but we're definitely moving down this direction to be able to really leverage these capabilities we're going to be talking about that SGP32 offers, and we're excited about what's coming there. I think that's pretty much good for me right now, so we can dive in and get into the conversation.
Lovely. Thank you, Scott. There's lots to think about, lots to talk about. So we are moving to the Q&A session. I see there is a question in. Please do ask them. A reminder, the panel is here to answer your questions, and what a great panel it is. Reminder of the topic, eSIM and IoT and how to navigate deployment pitfalls. If I can, I'm going to stop the screen share. If we can all turn our cameras on. Just got to figure out how to do that. There we go. And there we are. So hopefully you can see us all. Hello, everybody. So thank you both. That was very interesting. Lots to talk about. Maybe if I can pick up on a couple of points, just for my purposes as much as anything. Stefan, you mentioned platform instances of 300. Just explain platform instances. What does that mean? Normally it's kind of device deployments or something like that. What can you just explain to me?
Yeah, it might not have been entirely clear. Essentially, what we're talking about is, when we look at the remote SIM provisioning providers. So those are the ones who are developing the certified architecture, the back-end solution essentially to eSIM lifecycle management and provisioning. Just how many instances of those, say, SMDP that they have deployed for customers. So yeah, you're looking at about a 70-30 ratio in favor of consumer type platforms than you are for M2M. So, it's much bigger adoption for consumer right now.
So is that, would you say that's a measure of fleets of devices under management, as it were? Is that a correct way to?
No, because it's really looking at, MNOs will have perhaps multiple instances across the deployment. So it really underlines the fact that actually not that many MNOs support the M2M specification, which is why we saw that survey stat that enterprises and OEMs are complaining that their connectivity provider only supports one type of eSIM profile. Which type of profile is that? It's the consumer one invariably, whereas maybe they want more M2M support. So it creates a situation where you don't have a great choice on the market to deploy IoT devices. This is what SGP32 is hoping to change. Got you.
Okay. So that's brilliant. Okay, so Scott, maybe we can bring you in a little bit, and you talked about the 02 versus the SGP22 versus 32. That was quite clear, I think. But just in terms of that value that the F32 brings, Stefan raised some points about an education process that needs to happen among the end users, presumably the OEMs, the developers, this kind of stuff. Is that something you're seeing as well, Scott?
Yeah, very much. It's been an interesting process educating customers. I actually loved seeing that slide that Stefan had of the adopters and non-adopters. And when you look at the non-adopters, we run into the same thing. And I'm often surprised. You know, we run into customers, you get on a call, you start talking about eSIM. Quite often you get this confusion about, oh, you mean embedded SIMs. And it's like, no, that's completely different from eSIM. And then we'll get customers who will ask about eSIM, not even understanding that there are these three variants, the SGP variants that exist. And as we begin to educate them, you know, there are, I mean, in the title of this, these pitfalls, right, of the choices and what's going on. You know, we see, again, we offer O2 and it's educating customer about, you know, that O2 is there. It's a completely viable product, but there are some limitations on the flexibility of migration movement, some of the dynamic aspects of what can be done. And it is based on some older technologies. For example, SMS is still very central. And as the networks have evolved, you know, we've seen various places where there can be difficulty in doing things with O2. With 22, in the consumer world, it's fantastic. But when it's IoT, they have to start learning about this LPA, right? The fact that there has to be a software component somewhere in the system that is what is, you know, downloading and installing profiles on the physical SIM, managing which one is active. And there are open source LPA code bases. We have customers who are porting that into their products. There are modem vendors, which I really like, the module vendors themselves who have LPA code in the module. Makes it a little bit easier for device builder. If we've got a customer who is using, let's say, an Android tablet or an Android phone, they're able to potentially use their MDM system to remotely manage that and manage profiles onto the 22 SIM. But even hearing all of that, you realize the diversity of those solutions. It's all over the map. And it requires that investment of time and effort. 32, you know, really with the EIM connection, that remote SIM provision connection, to us is really changing things in sort of that standardized way of now doing it. I know one of the questions, one of the other pitfalls, things that we see with 32 and educating people is it can even support multiple EIM connections. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand, that it's not just having a single vendor owning that connection and managing that connection, but with multiple EIMs, you actually could have multiple systems. You're able to migrate between what system is providing that management. That standardization, that piece to me is what customers really need to understand and how that is going to impact them long term.
So, Scott, just to stay with you a moment, and that education process, that understanding, who is responsible for that? I mean, you're presumably part of that conversation as well. You know, is there a lot of hand-holding involved? Who else in the industry is kind of driving this, and how quickly does it happen? Because this is a hugely fragmented market with hugely, even it would appear the eSIM market is fragmented, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and so how do you simplify that? I mean, it's the classic digital change thing. It's got to be done case by case, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very good question. You know, we do invest heavily in supporting our customers and educating them as customers come to us wanting to learn about connectivity. You know, we really have a SA force, our system architects and staff that spend the time with the sales reps and the customer to make sure that we can educate them about these things and teach them. You know, SGP 32 to me. I don't know, Stefan, if you've seen any. I've even looked out on YouTube trying to find, you know, where can people learn? This is complex technology to some degree. And, you know, this brings in a whole nother aspect of the conversation, which is, you know, if a business has their specific business they're in insurance, they're in trucking, they're in the scooter business, it always puzzles me a little bit of, you know, yeah, should they have eSIM SGP32 experts on staff, or should they be relying on connectivity providers to help them out in understanding the choices and even helping with the management and the automation of that management of the profiles?
Stefan, I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because on one hand, this is a technology which is designed to abstract to an extent the complexity, and it's designed to, for an enterprise, the enterprise does not care about which network technology it's using, or presumably an enterprise does not actually want to switch. It doesn't want the headache of switching. It just wants to know that its connection is good and is delivering through the lifetime, through its lifetime. But at the same time, to get into this, to be able to be at that stage where you can forget about it, you have to become an expert in really complex cellular technology to an extent. Just how do you see that?
I mean, for the enterprise, I think where the enterprise is concerned, you're completely right. They just want things to work. And as I was talking about at the beginning, ultimately, when you're relying on IoT connectivity as a core part of your business, you want that connection to be reliable over 10 plus years. And essentially, that's the most powerful aspect of eSIM, because if you do run into trouble, whether it's regulatory pricing or you have an argument with your connectivity provider, you can leverage that eSIM to contract with someone else. And yeah, then enter a compliance scenario or a more cost-effective scenario if that's the case. But really, it's the job of service providers to abstract that complexity from really the end customers, because we're in an industry where we have silly acronyms like SGP32, for example. I mean, it's really difficult in that sense to reach the end customer. It's the device makers who perhaps need a bit more expertise. And I see certainly room for improvement there. I mean, I mentioned this to you the other day, but at Embedded World earlier this year, there was a presentation on certification for eSIM IoT, which I thought would be well attended. Embedded World is all about IoT, including myself. There was one other person in the audience. So there's really a gap there. I think people, they're building devices, but they don't necessarily think about how that connectivity is implemented. I think that's where a lot of education needs to happen.
So that's great. Thank you. So I'm going to get to a couple of questions. Reminder, we're here to ask questions. So if you have them, ask them. I'm going to ask the ones I understand first. Okay. Where are we? So there's a regional question just come in from Dandy Fabian, who asked, how does each region react to eSIM adoption? And I guess this plays into your point a little bit about roaming restrictions. Does it? I don't know. Stefan, perhaps you could pick up. Is there a regional difference? And I guess that's a regional difference from the service provider. Do you see that in terms of their response to this technology?
I mean, historically, we've seen eSIM adoption, as I mentioned, primarily in automotive and utilities use cases, which typically means regions like North America, Europe, and to a lesser extent, APAC. When you introduce SGP32 onto the market, then we're already seeing potential in areas like point of sale. So, for example, Brazil could suddenly become a very big market for eSIM. Other areas like healthcare, logistics. So you're going to be opening eSIM up as almost perhaps in 4 or 5 years as a de facto solution for IoT connectivity in general. Just because of the benefits it provides, hopefully we reach a stage where the implementation is seamless enough for that to happen.
Yeah, okay. And there's a question here from Jim Powell, who it might be Jim Powell I know, actually. Anyway, so Jim Powell asks about the time frames for SG32 eSIMs to be in general usage. I think, Stefan, you referenced a 2028 time frame for as a kind of tipping point, at least, for when there are more. Is that right? In the IoT space, at least, there are more 32 eSIM sales than anything else in the IoT space. Scott, how do you see these time frames? And you referenced earlier, I think you referenced earlier at least, that you're testing this stuff. Just where how does this ramp up?
Yeah, no, good question. Good question. We are doing testing today. We see the SGP32 market, it's still early. Part of that was because of certifications, things like that have slowed, some of the vendors on getting things out there. But we believe we're going to start seeing customer ramps with our products later this year. And 2026 is really, from our standpoint, when we think it's going to truly take off. There are vendors who are shipping solutions, but again, it's early days. I think that once we get into 2026, it's going to keep going. And from my perspective, at a certain point, if I were an IoT developer, I don't know that I would consider any other alternative in a new product. I mean, it just simply makes too much sense on the flexibility it gives me in managing my connectivity long term without having to truck roll or swap a device. And that's, the education and what I think in general, the vendors are all sharing with potential customers. And so we see that for people who are inquiring that are truly thinking about it, we expect that, next year is really going to be the liftoff.
Okay, and a related question, maybe Scott will stick with you, from Adrian, who says, he talks about soft SIMs, and there and with a reference to kind of Southeast Asia, China, that those kind of markets. But I just wonder about soft SIMs, but I also wonder about, presumably there is a part of the market which will not go down this route. You mentioned there that you can't kind of quite imagine a device that doesn't take this option, but there presumably is a very budget, low end, smart label type scenario, for instance, which it's just too pricey, and may take a soft SIM. Is that correct? I mean,
and I guess by a couple of things, by soft SIM, I'm not sure if they're referring to eSIM, one that is downloaded into the module. My thing about eSIM that I keep watching there is, is someone going to create sort of an SGP32 eSIM? Because the problems there is you're still sort of building that SIM profile, compiling it for a particular module. There's, again, not a lot of interoperability. There are certain things that have to be gone through to do eSIM. I think to me, it appears a great idea, but I think it still has to bake a little bit more for that to become real. As for costs, we actually are seeing that the chip vendors that we rely on to build our physical SIMs, both the embedded and plastic SIMs, are being highly aggressive with the SGP32 products. And we're believing at this point that we're going to see very competitive offerings and pricing of SGP32 silicon and the actual chips out there in the market, that it's not going to be a huge step up. Now, that then begs the question of who will be charging what for what management services and other things that they might bundle or try to make additional revenue on. But for the physical, installation, getting it on your product and integrated, we aren't seeing necessarily a huge jump at this time.
Stefan, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to add on the soft SIM side, I mean, yes, soft SIM is out there on the market today, but really, there's a very good reason why eSIM and iSIM are essentially hardware-based, and that's because of security. If you look at the the iSIM market, so programmable iSIMs conforming to eSIM specifications, the journey towards that has been very, very long because the system on chip players have had a hell of a time getting common criteria certification sorted to a satisfactory level for the GSMA and mobile network operators. Now, SoftSIM doesn't have that same level of security, so it will never reach massive adoption within the market because operators simply won't accept it. That's why you have eSIM as the future over the course of the next 7 or 8 or so years.
Okay, look, thank you, Stefan. So there's a couple of questions on the IoT manager, the eIM piece. There's also a question, any videos that demo the difference between SGP models for IoT? I don't know the answer to that. But AJ, there is a report coming out which will hopefully get into some of that. So I'm going to park that one for the moment. The questions on eIM, and I'll let either of you take these, just hands up. But the first one is the eIM hosted at a mobile network operator and kind of like whether there's a threat about lock-in in that scenario, if I understand the question correctly. And if that's reason to use a third-party eIM operator. Scott, maybe you have a view on that.
Yeah, I'll touch on that at first because I feel pretty strongly about this exact thing, which is I don't know that the selection of one versus the other is going to be critical in order to prevent lock-in because either one could lock you in. The biggest thing is that in the SGP32 standard, it includes a method to add an additional eIM to a SIM remotely and to delete an eIM from a SIM remotely. So that ability to migrate from one to the other is really key, in my opinion. That is something that if you're going to partner with the MNO, you have to make sure that they're going to provide you the facility to move to another eIM. If you go to a third party, you need to make sure that they're going to provide you a way to move to another eIM or add another eIM. And this is one of those pitfalls and it's a good question because the standard was designed to allow you to avoid lock-in, but depending on the partner you go with, they might still try to lock you in. If they refuse to allow another eIM to be connected, then you're stuck. You're now with that vendor forever. So that's a key question, that you want to focus on. And the other one that's important is that you really need to be talking to these vendors about what is their eIM, what is their remote capability going to provide you, because that's going to be another important reason why you might want to stick with or add an additional or move to a different eIM, because the automation, the portfolio of profiles, all the different capabilities that SGP32 is allowing you to, take advantage of could be throttled by the eIM vendor that you choose. You might choose and get in bed with one that just says, yeah, we aren't going to offer any other profiles, or we aren't going to let you do that through our console. And so those are some of the considerations. I'd be interested, Stefan, from your standpoint, what other things you think of in this topic?
No, I mean, yeah, you've covered it very well, Scott. I mean, ultimately, it's about making sure that you have control over your own fleet. I don't doubt that there will initially be some concerns among some operators about allowing flexibility in how the eIM is assigned to a particular eSIM. But there's already players on the market who are, positioning as providers with flexibility to switch if you want. So market forces will ultimately decide. And as long as customers are doing their due diligence, I think we'll see a much more flexible mechanism for eSIM moving forward.
Lovely. Okay, I think that's well answered. So there's a question here about there's a kind of like a personal story here, which I'm not going to ask at the moment, but please feel free to reach out to any of us separately of this session. There's a couple of good questions here from Martin Bell, who says, ask about on-prem versus cloud-based EIM and the difference between. And as a follow-up question about, I don't know about this, about EIM configuration operations, ECO, and whether when they'll be supported by EIM vendors. How are you, I mean, Scott, maybe you're more closely involved. I mean, if you if you if you
I think that one's going to be the tough one to answer, right?
yeah,
Because it's totally up to that EIM vendor. It depends on what their strategy is, what they're trying to do with their customers and the customers they're going to be going after. This is something that we're looking at right now, is trying to get a feel for what are the EIM vendors offering in the management solutions that they're going to provide. And so a lot of these things, it's not as though the standard forces a particular EIM vendor to do anything. It's a protocol, it's an interface. You know, some might offer it just as an API for someone else to build on top of, but others will start to offer some sort of console functionality, and then what they expose is completely up to them. The standard is pretty robust and nice. It's got, you know, functionality of actions you can take on the SIM, notifications the SIM can provide to the EIM, but how people are going to build on it, we're still in the early days.
yeah. Stefan, do you want to add anything on that?
Just on the on-prem cloud side of things, I think what you'll likely see is, most of the time, I would expect all of the different components to be provided by remote SIM provisioning players and then licensed by MNOs and connectivity providers. And really what you see right now on the market is the majority of those types of deployments live in the cloud. Unless there are specific regulations in place. In certain countries, you need to keep everything in country. So really the only thing that can't go in the cloud these days is the HSM for SIM crypto functions.
Okay. Just very quickly, there's a question here about the makeup of the device itself. Will any eSIM device work with SGP32 is the question, or are there specific requirements? Scott, just put us straight on that.
Yeah, no. So one of the things that I think is powerful about what the GSMA did, and as these standards evolved, is that the SIM interface with the modem has remained consistent from the non-eSIM products. So pretty much any device that you can put a SIM into, you can put an eSIM into. And so the electrical characteristics and the ability to put it in a device is just there. That's de facto. The biggest thing with SGP32 and in our testing, what we're looking at is that it's more now device firmware and things and how it deals with profile changes and going along things like that. So as an example, you can think of switching profiles in an eSIM as literally pulling a SIM out of a device and sticking a different SIM in. And if the modem, sends signals saying, hey, I detected the SIM's gone. Oh, no, I see a SIM's back. That's kind of what you see when you switch profiles. The firmware of the device has to be able to deal with that. It might have to use a different APN to get connectivity. It might have to set a different MTU size to communicate on that new profile. So there are things there that are, and these are things we're digging deep into in our testing and working with customers to really discover what are these in current devices, that compatibility, and then what do the developers of devices have to consider to, accommodate some of these things that might happen with SGP32.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna take over a little bit. There's a couple more questions, but just to kind of bring this to a head, if you like, and the point we're here is, and we have talked about it. We talked about the pitfalls and the issues and the challenges, and there are lots of them. But it sounds like fantastic kind of classic IoT innovation, brilliant, amazing, change the world type of stuff. But in practice, this is incremental and difficult, and Scott, just talk around the pitfalls. What are the watch outs here for you in sum?
Yeah, I think that the question about lock-in was a really good one. The entire to me the entire value of STP32 falls in this remote management and the flexibility it's providing. And so that lock-in has to be something you really have to consider with the EIM vendors and the EIM direction you go. And then the other one are things like the portfolio of profiles, the freedom to either have access to a good portfolio of the profiles to deal with the regulatory types of things or carriers that are available in a particular country, and or even profiles that might come from another vendor, that type of thing. And then the last one are some of these technical requirements is understanding again that as you get into this eSIM, you get into profile switching, your device has to comprehend that, a SIM got taken out and plugged back in with a different one. How does it handle and react? Those are some of the core ones we're seeing in our initial testing and working with customers.
And Stefan, just on the kind of lock-in, I mean, so from my sense from the conversations we've had previously, this is not actually the driver for this is not to jump around and switch networks and optimize performance, and it is about ensuring your investment long term, as it were, that kind of peace of mind and that reliability. So in ways, the idea that you even have to lock in is kind of a silly one, right? I mean, this is not what, to an extent. So if that is right, square that with the idea that really there is a shift in the kind of power dynamics with this. That is my sense, that there is a palpable sense that, the MNOs, the big MNOs or whatever, are not the ones holding all the aces suddenly.
Okay, so yes, I think no one is going to be switching willy-nilly between networks, because you have a situation then your devices, if you're partially switching your fleet, part of it will be connected to possibly one connectivity management platform, another part with another connectivity management platform. And you start to get all kinds of issues. You do have orchestration solutions that can solve that, but I start to worry about things like costs in that scenario. But it is true that the power dynamic does shift with SGP32, because in O2, it was all about SMSR swaps, and both parties had to agree to a swap. And of course, everyone ends up dragging their feet. You spend months integrating and so on. And then sometimes the whole process can be unreliable. This is what SGP32 solves, is that it shifts that dynamic away to a customer decision to switch networks, assuming they haven't been locked in the manner that Scott was describing earlier. So it's not going to be like, oh, it's Thursday, I want to switch to network B. It's going to be like, yeah, there's a real reason for me to need to switch, but at least I have this tool in place that I can execute that without spending months and several thousands of dollars.
So just Stefan, quickly as well, interesting your view, your sense of this orchestrator role, which is being a term that's being used, and the idea that this is a real thing, and it's required, but it is part of a bigger that bigger shift you've just discussed.
Yeah, so the orchestrator role is something that's been developing over the last 3 or 4 years. So, it's basically the concept of providing an overlay to manage connections across different connectivity management platforms, and thus, when you transfer that concept to eSIM, orchestrating eSIMs across different platforms. Why is it becoming more important? Because what I mentioned, more choice on the market means different players supporting connectivity, and a greater variety of players on the market means a greater variety of connectivity management platforms, And really, as an end customer, you want single pane of glass. That's why the orchestrator role is important. But I think, when you bring that into the SGP32 context, we haven't even launched any solutions yet. The maturation and adoption would take a good 2-3 years to gather steam. And it's at that stage that the orchestration concept becomes more important.
Scott, can I get your view on this? Both the power dynamic shifting to the likes of you, essentially, uh, and also presumably an orchestrator role going to you as somewhere down the line as well. I mean, evolving around your offer, evolving around that. I saw in your slides you do have one.
Yep. Yeah. I'd say we definitely, I agree with Stefan. I mean, the orchestrator is going to be really key, or what we'll say is the automation on top of the IM, because we even see this in an automated way. When you think about mobile devices, where we have people trucking in South America, they enter Brazil, and all of a sudden that's no permanent roaming country. You're going to need a Brazilian profile on there if they're staying for a while. But then when they move out of the country and they're in other places where roaming's allowed, possibly they go back to a roaming profile. Maybe there's a cost issue there or a flexibility of carrier support that they could go to. And now all of a sudden they come up through and, enter North America, going into the United States, and they're able to switch over to a carrier profile to get carrier grade capabilities. All of that should be transparent and rule-based and orchestrated in an automated fashion, and SGP32 allows for that. That's the kind of vision, that we see in this is, how can I ship the product one way? The SIM goes out with particular connectivity capabilities, but very dynamically, we're able to adapt, look at, analyze what that device is doing, whether it's fixed or mobile, and then optimize what profiles are on that device to give it the most cost-effective, most reliable connectivity.
So I think I said 45. We're approaching the hour now. So it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for the questions. And you know what? I'm tempted to save these and circulate these amongst our panel, and then put a piece online and kind of direct you towards it so that we can get to these. But just in the meantime, just finally, Stefan, it's kind of a cliched kind of a question, but we are at the end, and it's the time to ask these type of questions. But what advice do you have around this for the broader community? But I guess OEMs, end users, those, how to seize this opportunity, how to avoid the pitfalls.
I suppose one of the things is to observe a solution in action rather than just seeing it on paper. I think things like interoperability of all the different components, especially in a multi-vendor sourcing scenario right now, is very, very important, because we are really at an early stage of the market. And okay, you have the basic components of SGP32 tested and compliant and interoperable, but there are other elements that might unexpectedly not work in tandem. So bear that in mind, I think, when sourcing.
Lovely. Okay, and Scott, let's finish with you. Same question. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, from my perspective, is make sure you talk to many vendors. That's probably the biggest thing from a customer standpoint. Thinking of the points raised by Stefan, make sure to really learn from the analysts, of course, of what's out there, but talk to many vendors to make sure you compare notes and ask questions, ask to be educated. You want to go into it in a smart way, particularly if you're investing now for a long-term future.
Lovely. Okay, look, that is all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Just a reminder from our point of view, look out for those events in September. We hope to see you there. In the meantime, and one last time, I would like to thank Scott from Core and Stefan from Kaleido for their time, their patience with me. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions. They've been brilliant. And like I say, we will try and circulate those and get some answers for you. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.